The dust kicked up from the hooves of the bandits' horses had barely settled when Clara Pembrook realized what they had taken from her, and the scream that tore from her throat echoed across the Kansas plains like a wounded animal's cry. Her husband Thomas had been dead only 3 months, buried in the hard ground outside Salina after a farming accident took him too soon, and the simple gold band those outlaws just ripped from her finger was the last piece of him she had left in this world. She stood in the middle of the dirt road, her market basket overturned at her feet, vegetables scattered like autumn leaves. The 4 riders were already disappearing into the shimmer of heat on the horizon, their laughter carrying back to her on the hot August wind. Clara was 22 years old, widowed, alone, and now robbed of the one thing that had kept her tethered to the memory of the man she had loved since she was 17. "Madam, are you hurt?" The voice came from behind her, low and steady, with a gentle concern that cut through the fog of her shock. Clara turned to find a man dismounting from a paint horse, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that touched his collar beneath a worn hat. His eyes were the color of summer sage, green with flecks of gray, and they held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch despite her distress. "They took my ring," she managed, her voice breaking. "My wedding ring. It was all I had left of him." The cowboy's jaw tightened. He looked toward the horizon where the dust was still visible, then back at her. "Quinn Sutherland, madam. I saw what happened. Those were the Keller brothers, been terrorizing folks between here and Abilene for the better part of 2 months now. Can you get it back?" The question came out desperate, almost childlike, and Clara hated the weakness in her own voice. But she did not care about pride right now. She cared about that ring, about the way Thomas had slipped it on her finger 5 years ago in the small church on 3rd Street, about the promise it represented. Quinn studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. "I will bring it back to you. You have my word." "You do not even know me," Clara said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Why would you help me?" He picked up her basket, began gathering the scattered vegetables with surprising care for a man with such calloused hands, because it is the right thing to do, and because no woman should have to lose something that precious twice. He handed her the basket, their fingers brushing for just a moment. "Where can I find you when I return?" "The Pembrook farm, 2 miles east of town. The white house with the blue shutters." She paused, studying this stranger who was making her a promise most men would not bother to keep. "How will you track them? They could be anywhere by now." Quinn swung back up into his saddle with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "I have been tracking things since I was old enough to ride. Men, cattle, lost causes." A slight smile touched his lips. "They are headed north toward the Smoky Hill River. They will make camp before nightfall, probably near the Cottonwood Grove about 15 miles from here. I know their habits." "How?" "Because I have been following them for a week, waiting for the right moment to bring them in. There is a bounty on Jack Keller's head, $500, but that can wait until I get your ring back." Clara felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest, something she had not felt since Thomas died. It was not attraction, not yet, but it was awareness. This man, this stranger, was willing to risk his life for a piece of jewelry that meant nothing to anyone but her. "Be careful," she heard herself say. "Please." "I will be back before tomorrow's sunset," Quinn promised. Then he touched the brim of his hat, turned his horse, and rode north at an easy canter that would eat up the miles without exhausting his mount. Clara stood in the road long after he disappeared, the basket heavy in her arms, her heart beating with a mixture of hope and fear that felt almost like coming back to life. The afternoon sun was merciless as Quinn followed the trail the Keller brothers had left. 4 horses, one carrying a heavier load than the others, probably Jack Keller himself, the eldest brother and the meanest. Quinn had been hunting them not just for the bounty, but because they had killed a friend of his in a robbery gone wrong outside of Junction City. Samuel Hart had been a good man, a fellow ranch hand who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Kellers had shot him for the $43 in his pocket, but now Quinn had another reason to find them, and it burned in his chest like a brand. He had seen the devastation in Clara Pembrook's eyes, the kind of grief that went bone deep. He knew that look. He had seen it in the mirror for 2 years after his parents died of cholera when he was 18, leaving him alone in the world, with nothing but a horse and the clothes on his back. He was 25 now, had spent those 7 years drifting from ranch to ranch, town to town, never putting down roots because roots meant connections, and connections meant the possibility of loss. But something about Clara had cracked through the careful walls he had built. Maybe it was the way she had stood there in the dust, so small and so broken, yet asking him to be careful as if his life mattered to her, even though they had just met. The trail led exactly where Quinn expected, toward the river. He slowed his horse as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The cottonwoods appeared on the horizon, their leaves silver green in the fading light, and Quinn dismounted, ground tying his paint in a stand of buffalo grass. He moved on foot now, rifle in hand. Using the rolling terrain and scattered brush for cover, the smell of wood smoke reached him first, then the sound of voices. Quinn bellied down on a rise and looked into the small hollow where the Kellers had made camp. There were 4 of them, as he had counted earlier. Jack Keller was the big one, sitting on a log near the fire, cleaning his pistol with a rag. His brothers were younger, meaner looking despite their youth. Ray and Tom were twins, barely 20, with cold eyes and quick hands. The 4th man was Kurt Dawson, not a brother by blood but by choice, and wanted in 3 states for murder. Quinn watched as Jack pulled something from his pocket and held it up to the firelight. The gold band caught the flames and glowed like a tiny sun. Clara's ring. "Pretty little thing," Jack was saying, his voice carrying on the evening air. "Might fetch a few dollars in Abilene." "Should have taken more from that widow woman," Ray said, laughing. "She was right pretty herself." Quinn's finger tightened on the rifle. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think. 4 against 1 were poor odds, especially when the 4 were known killers. He needed to be smart about this. He waited until full dark, until the Kellers had eaten and were settling in for the night. Jack had tucked the ring back into his vest pocket before spreading out his bedroll. 2 of them would sleep while 2 kept watch, rotating through the night. It was smart, but Quinn had expected that. What they did not expect was for him to circle wide around the camp, moving slow as molasses, using every bit of cover the darkness provided. It took him 2 hours to get into position on the far side of their camp where their horses were picketed. He cut the picket line with his knife, quiet as a ghost, then sent the horses scattering with a sharp whistle. The camp erupted in confusion. All 4 men jumped up, grabbing for weapons, shouting at each other. In the chaos, Quinn moved toward the bedrolls, toward where Jack had been sleeping. The vest was there, crumpled on the ground. Quinn's hand closed around it just as someone shouted, "There!" A bullet whined past his ear. Quinn dropped, rolled, came up running. He had the vest, but now he had 4 angry outlaws shooting at him in the dark. He zigzagged through the cottonwoods, bullets clipping branches around him, his heart hammering against his ribs. His paint was where he had left her, well trained enough to stay ground-tied even with gunfire in the distance. Quinn hit the saddle at a dead run, the horse already moving before he was fully seated. More shots followed him, but he was beyond the firelight now, racing into the darkness with the Kellers' curses fading behind him. He did not stop until he was 5 miles away, until his horse was blowing hard and his own breathing had settled. Only then did he search the vest pockets. His fingers found the ring in the inside pocket, smooth and warm from where it had been pressed against Jack Keller's body. Quinn held it up to the starlight, this simple band of gold that meant everything to a woman he barely knew. He thought about her eyes, dark brown and deep with sorrow. He thought about the way she had asked him to be careful, and he realized with a start that he had not had anyone ask him that in years. The ride back to Selena took most of the night. Quinn pushed his paint harder than he liked, but urgency drove him. The Kellers would come after him once they gathered their scattered horses and figured out which direction he had gone. They would want revenge for the humiliation, and they would want that ring back to spite him if nothing else. The sun was just breaking over the horizon when Quinn rode up to the White House with blue shutters. The farm was modest but well kept, with a small barn and a chicken coop, fields that had been planted but now looked somewhat neglected. Quinn supposed a widow alone would struggle to keep up with all the work. Clara must have heard the horse because she came out onto the porch before he could dismount. She was wearing a simple blue dress, her dark hair pulled back in a bun, and in the morning light Quinn could see she was even prettier than he had thought yesterday. Not beautiful in the delicate way of the women in the Tyne-type portraits, but lovely in a real way, with strong features and expressive eyes that looked at him now with desperate hope. "Did you find them?" she asked, coming down the steps. Quinn dismounted, every muscle in his body aching from the long ride and the tension of the night. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. Clara's hands flew to her mouth. She made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and then she was reaching for the ring with shaking fingers. Quinn placed it gently in her palm and watched as she closed her fist around it, holding it to her chest as tears streamed down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Oh God, thank you." Quinn felt something crack wider in his chest, that wall he had spent 7 years building. "You are welcome, madam." She looked up at him, really looked at him, and Quinn saw the moment she noticed the tear in his shirt, the blood stain on his sleeve where a bullet had grazed him. "You are hurt." "It is nothing, just a scratch." "Come inside," Clara said, and it was not a request. "Let me clean that wound and feed you breakfast. It is the least I can do." Quinn knew he should refuse, should ride back to town and get himself cleaned up before tracking down the sheriff to report on the Kellers' location. But he was tired and hungry, and there was something in Clara's eyes that made him want to stay just for a little while. The inside of the house was neat and spare, with simple furniture and curtains at the windows. Clara directed him to sit at the kitchen table while she pumped water into a basin and gathered clean cloths. As she worked to clean the bullet graze on his arm, Quinn studied the room. There was a photograph on the mantel of a young couple, Clara and her husband presumably, both looking stiff and serious the way people did in photographs. "Thomas was a good man," Clara said quietly, following his gaze. "We married when I was 17. He was 23, a farmer's son from Illinois who came west to start his own place. We had 5 good years together." "I am sorry for your loss," Quinn said, and meant it. Clara's hands were gentle as she wrapped a bandage around his arm. "The accident happened in May. He was trying to fix the plow, and it slipped, crushed his chest. He died before the doctor could get here from town." She tied off the bandage and stepped back. "I have been trying to keep the farm going, but it is hard alone." "I can see you have been doing your best," Quinn said. "The fields look well planted." "But not well maintained," Clara said with a sad smile. "I am not strong enough to do everything that needs doing. I have been thinking about selling, moving back east to live with my sister in Ohio, but I could not bear to leave without that ring. It would have felt like abandoning Thomas completely." She slipped the ring back onto her finger, and Quinn noticed it fit perfectly, a little worn from years of wear. Clara looked at it for a long moment, then back at him. "Now let me cook you breakfast. You look like you have not eaten in days." Quinn had not realized how hungry he was until the smell of frying bacon and eggs filled the kitchen. Clara moved around the room with practiced efficiency, and soon she was setting a plate in front of him laden with food. She sat across from him with her own smaller portion, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "What will you do now?" Clara asked finally. "About the Kellers, I mean." "Report to the sheriff, see if I can round up a posse to bring them in. They will probably move on after last night, but I can track them again if needed." Quinn paused, considering. "But they might come here first looking for revenge. They know I returned the ring, and they might figure out who I returned it to." Clara's face paled. "You think they would come here?" I think it is possible. Jack Keller is not the type to let a slight go unanswered. Quinn pushed his empty plate away and leaned forward. Do you have any family in town? Somewhere you could stay for a few days? No, my parents are both gone, and Thomas's family stayed in Illinois. I have friends in town, but I cannot just abandon my farm, my animals. Quinn made a decision then, one that went against every instinct he had developed over 7 years of drifting. Then I will stay here, if you will have me, just until we know for certain the Kellers have moved on. Clara's eyes widened. I cannot ask you to do that. You have already done so much. You are not asking, I am offering. Quinn held her gaze. Besides, you said yourself the farm needs work. I can help with that while I keep watch. He could see the conflict in her face, propriety warring with practicality. A widow alone with a man who was not family would cause talk in town, but the alternative was being defenseless if the Kellers did come. All right, Clara said finally, but you will sleep in the barn, and we will be absolutely proper about this arrangement. Of course, madam, Quinn agreed, though he could not help the small smile that tugged at his lips. The next 3 days fell into a pattern that felt almost domestic. Quinn slept in the barn, which was actually more comfortable than many places he had stayed over the years, with clean hay and a roof that did not leak. He rose with the sun and worked on the farm, fixing the plow that had killed Thomas, mending fences, weeding the vegetable garden that had become overgrown. Clara cooked meals for both of them, and they ate together at the kitchen table, talking about small things at first, then gradually bigger things. Quinn learned that Clara had grown up in Missouri, that her father had been a school teacher and her mother a seamstress. She had learned to read and write, which was not common for women out here, and she loved books. She showed him the small shelf of volumes she had brought west with her, mostly poetry and novels. Clara learned that Quinn had been born in Texas, that his father had been a horsebreaker and his mother a laundress who took in work from the big ranches. He had learned to ride before he could properly walk, had learned to track from a half-Apache ranch hand named Miguel who had taken pity on an orphaned boy. He had drifted north after his parents died, working cattle drives and ranch jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Why not? Clara asked on the third evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset over the fields. Why never stay? Quinn was quiet for a long moment. I suppose because staying means caring, and caring means the possibility of losing. I lost my parents, lost my friend Samuel to the Kellers. It seemed easier to keep moving, not to let anyone get close enough to matter. That sounds like a lonely way to live, Clara said softly. It has been, Quinn admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. But it felt safer than the alternative. Clara was wearing the ring, as she always did now. She twisted it absently on her finger, a gesture Quinn had noticed she made when she was thinking deeply. I understand that impulse. After Thomas died, I wanted to shut myself away from everything. It hurt too much to see couples together, to watch families in town, to imagine a future without him. But I realized that closing myself off did not honor his memory. He loved life, loved people. He would have wanted me to keep living, really living, not just existing. Quinn looked at her in the fading light, at the strength in her face, the resilience. You are a remarkable woman, Clara Pembrook. She met his eyes, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared pain and shared survival. And you are a good man, Quinn Sutherland. Better than you seem to think you are. That night, Quinn lay in the barn, staring up at the rafters, unable to sleep. He was thinking about Clara, about the way she laughed at his stories, about the way she had looked this evening with the sunset painting her face in shades of gold and rose. He was thinking about how natural it felt to sit on that porch with her, how right it felt to work this land and eat at that table and talk about everything and nothing. He was thinking that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to stop drifting. On the fourth day, the Kellers came. Quinn saw the dust on the horizon around mid-morning. He was in the north field, but he had positioned himself so he had a clear view of the road leading to the farm, 4 riders moving at a steady pace. He ran for the house. Clara was in the kitchen, her hands covered in flour from making bread. She looked up as Quinn burst through the door, and her face went pale at his expression. "They are coming," he said. "Get in the root cellar and stay there no matter what you hear." "Quinn, no. There are 4 of them, and only 1 of you. Which is why I need you safe and out of the way." He grabbed his rifle from where he had left it by the door, checked the chamber. "Please, Clara, I cannot focus on them if I'm worried about you." She searched his face for a moment, then nodded. The root cellar was accessed through a trapdoor in the pantry floor. Quinn waited until she was down the ladder, then lowered the door and covered it with a heavy sack of flour. If anyone looked, they would not see the cellar entrance. Then he went out to meet the Kellers. They reined in their horses about 50 yards from the house, spreading out in a line. Jack Keller was in the middle, his face dark with anger. "You have got some nerve, Sutherland, stealing from us like that." "I did not steal anything that was not already stolen," Quinn called back. He was standing on the porch, rifle held loose but ready. "The ring belonged to Mrs. Pembrook. I just returned what was hers." "And embarrassed us in the process," Ray Keller said, his hand hovering over his pistol. "Made us look like fools, running around in the dark chasing our horses." "That was your own doing," Quinn said. "You could have let it go, moved on. But you came here looking for trouble instead." "We came here to finish what you started," Jack said, "and to teach that widow woman a lesson about who to give information to." Quinn's blood went cold. "She had nothing to do with this. This is between you and me." "Oh, it is much more than that now," Jack said, and he started to dismount. Quinn raised the rifle. "Stay on your horse, Jack, all of you. You're not welcome here." "You going to shoot all 4 of us before we can draw?" Tom Keller asked, laughing. "I do not think so, Cowboy." "Maybe not," a new voice said from behind the Kellers, "but he will not be alone in trying." Quinn felt a surge of relief as Sheriff Daniel Hayes rode up with 3 deputized men, all armed, all spreading out to flank the Kellers. The sheriff was an older man, grizzled and tough, with a reputation for fairness but no tolerance for lawlessness. "Morning, Jack," the sheriff said pleasantly, "and seems you boys have been causing quite a bit of trouble lately. Got warrants for all 4 of you. Now you can come peacefully, or we can do this the hard way. Either way, you're coming back to Salina with us." The Kellers looked at each other, calculating odds that had suddenly shifted very much against them. Quinn had ridden into town the day after he brought back the ring, had told the sheriff everything, and asked him to keep an eye on the farm. Apparently Hayes had taken him seriously. Jack Keller's hand twitched toward his gun, and for a moment Quinn thought it was going to turn into a bloodbath. Then Jack relaxed, raised his hands. "All right, Sheriff, we will come peaceful. No need for shooting." "Smart choice," Hayes said. He nodded to his deputies, who moved in to disarm and bind the Kellers. It was over in minutes, the 4 outlaws trussed up and looking surly but defeated. The sheriff rode over to where Quinn still stood on the porch. That was good tracking, getting that ring back, and good thinking, coming to me about the possibility of them showing up here. "Thank you for believing me and for coming when you did," Quinn said. "Well, there is a reward for bringing them in. 500 for Jack, 200 each for the others. That is $1,100, enough for a man to do something with his life." Hayes tipped his hat. "Come by the office tomorrow and we'll get the paperwork sorted out." After the sheriff and his prisoners rode away, Quinn went back into the house and moved the flour sack, opened the cellar door. Clara was standing at the bottom of the ladder, her face pale but composed. "Is it over?" she asked. "It is over," Quinn confirmed, reaching down to help her up. She climbed the ladder and stepped into his arms without thinking, and Quinn held her as she shook with relief. It felt natural to hold her, to feel her heart beating against his chest, to smell the flour in her hair and the lavender soap she used. "I was so afraid," Clara whispered against his shirt. "I heard voices but could not make out words. I thought they were going to kill you." "I am all right," Quinn said, his hand stroking her back in what he hoped was a comforting gesture. "We are both all right. The sheriff arrested them. They are going to prison." Clara pulled back enough to look up at him, and Quinn saw tears tracking through the flour dust on her face. Without thinking, he reached up to wipe them away, his thumb gentle on her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment. When she opened them again, Quinn saw something there that made his heart stutter. It was the same awareness he felt, the same recognition that something had shifted between them over these 4 days. They were no longer strangers bound by circumstance. They were something more, something neither of them had been looking for, but both of them needed. "Quinn," Clara said softly, and the way she said his name felt like a question and an answer all at once. He should have stepped back, should have maintained the proper distance, but proper distance was the last thing he wanted. Instead, he lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not pull away. She lifted her face to his, and when their lips met, it was soft and tentative and absolutely right. The kiss lasted only a moment before Clara stepped back, her hand going to her mouth, her eyes wide. "I am sorry. I should not have—" "I kissed you," Quinn said gently. "And I am not sorry, but I understand if you think it is too soon, if you are not ready." Clara looked at the ring on her finger, at this symbol of her marriage to Thomas. Then she looked back at Quinn, and he saw the conflict in her face. "I loved my husband. I will always love him. But he is gone, and I am still here, still alive. And I think—" She paused, gathering courage. "I think he would want me to be happy again, to find someone who treats me with kindness, who makes me feel safe, who looks at me the way you look at me." "How do I look at you?" Quinn asked, though he thought he knew. "Like I matter," Clara said simply. "Like I am worth riding through the night for, worth fighting 4 outlaws for, worth staying for." Quinn reached for her hand, the one with the ring, and held it carefully. "You are worth all of that and more, Clara. You are worth putting down roots for, worth building a life with, if you will have me." "We have known each other less than a week," Clara said, but she was smiling even as she said it. "I know, and I know it is fast. But when you have spent years drifting, you learn to recognize when you have found something real." Quinn brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles just above the ring. "I am not asking you to forget your husband or to stop loving him. I am just asking for a chance to be part of your life, to help you build something new while honoring what you had before." Clara was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. Then she squeezed his hand. "I would like that. I would like that very much. But let us take it slow. Let us do this right. Court properly, get to know each other without the urgency of danger pushing us together." "I can do slow," Quinn agreed, though the grin on his face belied his eagerness. "How does Sunday supper sound? I could pick you up for church, bring you back here for a meal?" "That sounds perfect," Clara said, and the smile she gave him was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Quinn left that evening after helping Clara finish the chores, riding back to town with his heart lighter than it had been in years. He collected his reward money from the sheriff the next day, $1,100 that felt like a fortune in his hands. He had never had that much money at once in his entire life. He spent some of it on a new set of clothes, a proper shirt and vest and trousers that were not worn thin at the knees. He got a shave and a haircut at the barber shop, sitting still while the man worked and thinking about Clara, about the way she had kissed him back, about the possibility of a future he had never let himself imagine before. On Sunday, he picked Clara up in a rented buggy, having determined that asking her to ride double on his paint was not appropriate for a proper courtship. She was wearing a green dress that brought out the warm tones in her skin, and her hair was arranged in a style he had not seen before, softer around her face. "You look beautiful," Quinn said, and watched her blush with pleasure. Church was a revelation. Quinn had not been to a service in years, had forgotten the comfort of hymns and community. He sat next to Clara in the pew and tried to ignore the curious looks from the other townspeople, the whispers about the widow Pembrook and the cowboy who had tracked down the Kellers. After the service, several women approached Clara, ostensibly to welcome Quinn, but really to get a closer look at this development. Quinn endured their scrutiny with good humor, answering questions about where he was from and what his intentions were with as much honesty as he could manage. Mrs. Harriet Thompson, a stout woman who ran the general store with her husband, was particularly direct. "Are you courting our Clara then, Mr. Sutherland?" "I am hoping to, madam, with her permission," Quinn said, glancing at Clara, who was trying not to laugh. "Well, she could do worse," Mrs. Thompson declared. "Any man brave enough to face down the Keller gang for a wedding ring is decent in my book. But you treat her right, you hear? She has been through enough." "I will, madam, I promise." They drove back to the farm in the buggy, and Clara did laugh then, a free and joyous sound that Quinn wanted to hear every day for the rest of his life. "I am sorry about Mrs. Thompson. She means well, but she can be rather overwhelming." "I liked her," Quinn said honestly. "It is nice to know you have people looking out for you." Clara made them a simple Sunday dinner of roast chicken and vegetables from her garden, and they ate on the porch in the warm afternoon, talking about everything and nothing. Quinn told her about the cattle drives he had worked, the places he had seen from Texas to Wyoming. Clara told him about her childhood in Missouri, about learning to read from her father and to sew from her mother. "What will you do with the reward money?" Clara asked as they watched the sun begin its descent. "I have been thinking about that," Quinn admitted. "I could buy some land, start a small ranch, or I could invest it, maybe buy into a business in town, but mostly I have been thinking I would like to use it to build something stable, something lasting." He did not say that he had been thinking about using it to help Clara keep her farm, to hire hands to work the fields so she would not have to sell and move away. He did not want to presume, did not want to move too fast, but the thoughts were there, persistent and hopeful. Clara twisted her ring, that habitual gesture. "Thomas and I used to dream about building this farm into something bigger, having children to help work it, maybe buying more land. We wanted a whole life here." She looked at Quinn. "I gave up on that dream when he died. But lately I've been thinking that maybe dreams can change, can evolve into something different but equally good." "I think they can," Quinn said softly. "I think we get to choose whether we let loss define us or whether we let it teach us to appreciate what we have even more." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, and when Quinn finally left, he kissed Clara again, this time with her full and enthusiastic participation. It was still soft, still gentle, but there was a promise in it, a hint of deeper passion held in check by mutual agreement to take things slow. Over the next 3 months, Quinn courted Clara with a determination and sincerity that surprised even him. He continued to help on the farm, but now he paid rent for the privilege of using the barn, insisting that it was only proper. He took Clara to church every Sunday, to socials in town, to the harvest dance in late October where they danced until Clara's feet hurt, and Quinn's face ached from smiling. The town of Salina grew accustomed to seeing them together, and the initial curiosity faded into acceptance. Quinn became a familiar figure, the cowboy who had brought back the widow's ring, who was helping her keep her farm running, who looked at her like she hung the moon. Clara bloomed under the attention and the help. The shadows that had haunted her eyes began to fade, replaced by a brightness that Quinn took pride in nurturing. She laughed more easily, smiled more often. She began to talk about the future in terms of possibilities rather than losses. In November, Quinn bought a piece of land adjacent to Clara's farm, 20 acres with a small creek running through it and good grazing for horses. He used part of his reward money for the down payment and started making plans to build a house there, a small ranch house that could grow as needed. "You are really staying," Clara said when he showed her the deed. "I am really staying," Quinn confirmed. "I found something worth putting down roots for." They were in the barn, checking on one of Clara's cows that was about to give birth. The air smelled of hay and animals, warm and earthy. Clara was wearing one of her work dresses, her hair coming loose from its bun, and Quinn thought she had never looked more beautiful. "Quinn," Clara said, and there was something in her voice that made him turn to give her his full attention. "I need to tell you something." His heart stuttered with sudden fear. "All right." She reached up and slowly pulled the ring from her finger, the wedding ring that had started all of this. Quinn watched, confused, as she held it in her palm, looking at it with a mixture of love and sadness. "I will always treasure this ring and what it represents," Clara said quietly. "Thomas gave me 5 wonderful years, and I will carry the memory of him in my heart for the rest of my life. But I realize now that continuing to wear it is not fair to you or to what we are building together." She looked up at Quinn with tears shining in her eyes. "I am ready to move forward. I am ready to build a new life, a new dream, with you, if you still want that." Quinn could not speak past the lump in his throat. He pulled Clara into his arms and held her tight, his face buried in her hair. "I want that," he managed. "I want that more than anything." Clara pulled back enough to reach for his hand, and she pressed the ring into his palm. "Will you keep this safe for me, as a reminder of where we started, of what brought us together?" Quinn closed his fist around the ring, feeling the weight of the trust she was placing in him. "I will keep it safe, I promise." That night, Quinn went into town and visited the jeweler, an old man named Mr. Goldstein who had been working with precious metals for 40 years. Quinn showed him Clara's wedding ring and explained what he wanted. Mr. Goldstein listened, examining the ring carefully, then nodded. "I can do this. It will take me about 2 weeks to craft it properly. You are sure this is what you want?" "I am sure," Quinn said. "It is perfect." 2 weeks later, on a cold December afternoon, Quinn picked Clara up for what she thought was just another Sunday drive. Instead, he drove her to a spot on his new land where the view stretched out over the prairie, endless and beautiful under the winter sky. "Why are we stopping here?" Clara asked, laughing as Quinn helped her down from the buggy. "Because this is where I want to build our house," Quinn said. "If you will have me, that is." Clara's eyes went wide. "Quinn, what are you saying?" He dropped to one knee in the prairie grass, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring he had designed with Mr. Goldstein's help. The band was new, slightly wider than Clara's wedding ring had been, but set into it was a small piece of the original ring melted down and reformed, a piece of her past incorporated into her future. "Clara Pembrook, I know we have only known each other for a few months, but in that time, you have become the most important person in my world. You taught me that it is possible to honor the past while embracing the future, to grieve what you have lost while celebrating what you have found. I love you, Clara. I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. I love the way you laugh and the way you think and the way you see the best in people even when they do not deserve it. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you happy?" Tears were streaming down Clara's face, but she was smiling, that brilliant smile that Quinn loved. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Quinn, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, a symbol of past and future intertwined. Then he stood and kissed her, and this time there was no holding back, no restraint. This was a kiss of promise and passion, of love acknowledged and accepted. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church on 3rd Street, the same church where Clara had married Thomas 5 years before. It was a simple ceremony, attended by friends from town and a few ranch hands Quinn had worked with over the years. Clara wore a blue dress she had sewn herself, and Quinn wore his new clothes with a white flower in his buttonhole that Mrs. Thompson had insisted on. As they exchanged vows, Quinn looked into Clara's eyes and saw his whole future there. He promised to love her in sickness and in health, to honor and cherish her all the days of his life. Clara promised the same, her voice steady and sure, her hand warm in his. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed his bride with a joy that felt almost too big to contain. The small congregation cheered, and Mrs. Thompson cried into her handkerchief, and Quinn thought that he had never been happier in his entire life. They spent their wedding night in the farmhouse, in the bedroom that had been Clara's alone for so long and was now theirs together. Quinn was gentle with her, conscious that it had been months since she had been with anyone, conscious of honoring the trust she was placing in him. But Clara met him with equal passion, with a hunger that spoke of loneliness ended and love embraced. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Clara's head on Quinn's chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. The ring on her finger caught the moonlight coming through the window, new and familiar all at once. "Tell me about the ring," Clara said softly. "I saw the piece of gold worked into it. Is that from—" "From your wedding ring, yes," Quinn confirmed. "I asked Mr. Goldstein to incorporate a piece of it into your new ring. I wanted you to have a tangible connection to Thomas, to that part of your life. I did not want you to feel like you had to choose between honoring your past and building our future." Clara was quiet for a long moment, and Quinn worried he had overstepped. Then she turned her face up to his, and he saw she was crying again. But these were good tears, happy tears. "That is the most thoughtful thing anyone has ever done for me. Thank you, Quinn. Thank you for understanding." "You are easy to understand," Quinn said, kissing her forehead. "You have a heart big enough for all of it, the grief and the joy, the loss and the love. That is one of the things I love most about you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and when Quinn woke to the pale light of dawn, he found Clara already awake, watching him with a soft smile. "Good morning, husband," she said, and Quinn's heart swelled with the simple rightness of it. "Good morning, wife," he replied, and kissed her again, slow and sweet. The winter passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Quinn began building the house on his land, with help from several men in town who owed him favors or simply liked him. Clara helped when she could, bringing food and water to the work site, offering suggestions on the design. The house took shape slowly but surely, a sturdy structure of wood and stone with a wide porch and large windows to let in the prairie light. Quinn built it with care, thinking about the future, about the children he and Clara talked about having, about growing old here together. In March, Clara told him she was pregnant. They had been married less than 3 months, but Quinn was overjoyed. He picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, laughing at her mock protests, kissing her until they were both breathless. "We are going to have a baby," Clara said, wonder in her voice. "Quinn, we are going to be parents." "We are going to be amazing parents," Quinn corrected, his hand settling on her still, flat stomach with awe. "This child is going to be so loved, so wanted." The house was finished in late April, just as Clara was beginning to show. They moved in together, bringing furniture from Clara's farmhouse and new pieces Quinn built himself. Clara hung curtains and arranged the kitchen while Quinn set up the bedroom and built a cradle in the room they designated as the nursery. They combined the two farms into one operation, keeping Clara's farmhouse as a place for hired hands to stay. With the remaining money from Quinn's reward and careful management, they were able to hire 2 men to help with the planting and livestock, freeing Quinn to focus on starting his horse breeding program. The horses were his passion, had been since he was a boy learning to ride. He bought 3 good mares and a quality stallion, began the slow work of building a herd that would be known for intelligence and endurance. Clara loved watching him work with the animals, loved the patience and gentleness he showed them. Summer brought heat and hard work, but also satisfaction. The crops grew tall and green, the horses thrived, and Clara blossomed with pregnancy. Quinn had never seen her happier, humming as she worked in the house, talking to the baby she carried, planning for the future with an excitement that was infectious. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, Quinn's hand on Clara's growing belly, feeling the baby kick and turn. They talked about names, about whether it would be a boy or a girl, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. "I want to be like my mother," Clara said one evening in late August, her hand covering Quinn's on her stomach. "Patient and kind, but firm when needed. I want our children to know they are loved, but also to understand responsibility and hard work. I want to be like my father, Quinn said. He was a hard man in many ways, had to be to survive, but he was never cruel. He taught me that you can be strong and gentle at the same time, that real strength is in protecting those weaker than you, not in dominating them. Our child is lucky to have you as a father, Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Our child is lucky to have you as a mother, Quinn countered, kissing the top of her head. In early October, as the leaves were beginning to turn and the air held the first hint of fall chill, Clara went into labor. It was late afternoon, and Quinn was in the barn with the horses when one of the hired hands, a young man named Peter, came running. "Boss, Mrs. Sutherland says it is time." Quinn dropped the bridle he was holding and ran for the house. He found Clara in the bedroom, her face pale but determined. Mrs. Thompson was already there, having come by for a visit and stayed when Clara's water broke. "Everything is fine," Mrs. Thompson assured Quinn, though her hands were busy preparing the bed. "First babies take a while. You go boil water and tear some clean sheets into strips, and stay calm for heaven's sake. She needs you steady." Quinn did as he was told, though every cry from the bedroom made his hands shake. He had faced down armed outlaws without flinching, but the thought of Clara in pain, of something going wrong, terrified him more than anything he had ever encountered. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. The doctor arrived around midnight, a gruff man named Dr. Hendricks, who examined Clara and pronounced everything normal, if slow. Quinn was allowed into the bedroom between contractions, holding Clara's hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragement. "I am here," he told her again and again. "You are doing so well. I love you so much." Clara gripped his hand hard enough to leave marks, her strength surprising despite her exhaustion. "Do not leave me," she gasped between contractions. "Never," Quinn promised. "I am not going anywhere." As the sun rose on October 14th, 1883, Clara gave one final tremendous push, and their son came into the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Quinn's eyes. Dr. Hendricks caught the baby expertly, cut the cord, and handed the squalling infant to Mrs. Thompson to clean. "You have a healthy boy," the doctor announced, grinning. "Good lungs on him." Clara was crying and laughing at the same time, reaching for the baby. Mrs. Thompson placed the cleaned and swaddled infant in her arms, and Quinn sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping his arms around both of them, his family. The baby had dark hair like Clara and eyes that would probably turn green like Quinn's, though it was hard to tell yet. He had tiny, perfect fingers that gripped Quinn's thumb with surprising strength, and a rosebud mouth that was already rooting for food. "Hello, little one," Clara whispered, her voice full of wonder. "We have been waiting for you." "He is perfect," Quinn said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are perfect, both of you." They named him Thomas Samuel, after Clara's first husband and Quinn's lost friend. It felt right to honor both men who had shaped their lives, to give their son a legacy of goodness to live up to. Quinn was a devoted father from the first moment, learning to change diapers and rock the baby to sleep, walking the floor at night when Thomas had colic, marveling at every tiny development. He built a larger cradle, then a crib, always thinking ahead to what they would need. Clara recovered quickly from the birth, her natural strength reasserting itself. She was a natural mother, patient and loving, but also practical. She nursed the baby and sang to him and told him stories about his father and his namesakes, about the grandfather and friend he would never meet but whose memory lived on. The first year of Thomas's life flew by in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful discoveries. First smiles, first laughs, first teeth, first words. Quinn and Clara marveled at each milestone, documenting them in a journal Clara kept. They had the baby photographed on his first birthday, a serious portrait of Thomas sitting on Clara's lap while Quinn stood behind them, his hand on her shoulder, all of them dressed in their Sunday best. That photograph would hang in their house for the rest of their lives, a reminder of their first child, their first year as a complete family. In the spring of 1884, Quinn expanded the horse breeding operation, buying more mares and another stallion. His reputation for producing quality horses was beginning to spread, and buyers came from as far as Dodge City and Abilene to look at his stock. The money was good, allowing them to hire more help and make improvements to both the house and the barns. Clara returned to working the farm alongside caring for Thomas, though Quinn insisted she not overdo it. They hired a young woman from town, Sarah Mitchell, to help with the house and the baby, so Clara could rest when needed. Sarah was 16, eager and cheerful, and she adored Thomas, playing with him for hours while Clara worked in the garden or helped Quinn with the books. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Work and family, sunrise and sunset, the changing seasons marking time. Quinn had never been happier, had never felt more settled or complete. He looked at Clara, at their son, at the house and land they were building together, and felt a gratitude so deep it was almost painful. On a warm evening in June, they sat on the porch as they so often did, watching Thomas toddle around the yard under Sarah's watchful eye. The boy was 14 months old now, walking confidently, if not gracefully, getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of toddlers. "Do you ever think about where we would be if those bandits had not stolen my ring?" Clara asked, her hand finding Quinn's. Quinn laced his fingers through hers, feeling the wedding ring he had made for her, warm from her skin. "I think about it sometimes. I probably would have kept drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. And you would have sold the farm, moved to Ohio to live with your sister." "We would never have met," Clara said softly. "No, we would not have." Quinn brought her hand to his lips, kissed the ring. "I know it is strange to be grateful for something that caused you pain, but I cannot help it. That theft brought me to you, brought me home." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their son play. "I used to feel guilty about being happy again. Like I was betraying Thomas's memory by falling in love with you, by building this new life. But I have come to realize that love is not finite. We do not have to ration it, choose between honoring the past and embracing the present. We can do both." "You have taught me that," Quinn said. "You have taught me so much about resilience and grace and choosing hope even when it would be easier to give up." They sat in comfortable silence for a while until Thomas got tired and fussy. Sarah brought him to Clara, and Quinn watched his wife settle their son against her shoulder, patting his back and humming softly until the boy's eyes grew heavy. "I have something to tell you," Clara said after Sarah had gone inside to start supper. Quinn's heart jumped. He recognized that tone. "You are pregnant again." Clara smiled, that brilliant smile he loved. "I am. The baby should come in early January, if my calculations are right." Joy surged through Quinn. He kissed Clara carefully, mindful of the sleeping toddler between them. "Another baby. That is wonderful news." "I thought you would be pleased," Clara said, laughing softly. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose, was born on January 10th, 1885, during a snowstorm that blanketed the prairie in white. The labor was easier this time, faster, and Margaret came into the world with the same healthy cry her brother had, announcing her presence to the world. She had Clara's dark eyes and delicate features, and from the first moment Quinn was besotted with his daughter. He held her with infinite care, this tiny person who was half him and half Clara, marveling at her miniature perfection. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her and hold her with toddler clumsiness that required constant supervision. Clara was endlessly patient, teaching him to be gentle, to help with small tasks like bringing a clean diaper or singing to Margaret when she fussed. The house that had seemed so large when Quinn first built it now felt perfectly sized, filled with the noise and chaos of small children. Toys scattered across the floor, laundry always hanging to dry, meals eaten in shifts because someone always needed tending. It was exhausting and wonderful, and everything Quinn had never known he wanted. The years passed in a steady march of small moments that added up to a life. Thomas started helping with simple farm chores at 4, learning to gather eggs and feed chickens. Margaret took her first steps at 10 months earlier than her brother, and never stopped moving after that. She was fearless where Thomas was cautious, always climbing things and exploring places that gave Quinn heart palpitations. In 1887, Clara was pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to twin boys James and John in the heat of July. The twins were identical, impossible to tell apart except that James had a small birthmark on his left shoulder. They were mischievous from the start, always getting into things together, communicating in looks and half words that only they understood. The house had to be expanded. Quinn built an addition, more bedrooms upstairs, a larger kitchen and dining area downstairs. They needed the space, needed the help of Sarah and another young woman, Elizabeth, to manage the household while Clara focused on the children, and Quinn ran the ever-growing farm and horse breeding operation. Quinn's horses had become well known throughout Kansas and into Missouri and Nebraska. He had developed a reputation for honesty and quality, and buyers trusted that any horse bearing the Sutherland brand would be sound and well-trained. The business provided well for the family, allowing them comforts Quinn had never dreamed of as a drifting cowboy. But the best parts of his life had nothing to do with money or reputation. The best parts were the evenings on the porch with Clara, talking about their day while the children played in the yard, the mornings waking up with her in his arms, sunlight streaming through the windows, the family dinners around the big table, noisy and chaotic and perfect, the bedtime stories, the skinned knees that needed kissing, the small triumphs and defeats of raising children. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. He reminded Quinn of what Clara had said about her father being a teacher, and they talked about sending him to a good school when he was older, maybe even back east to college if he wanted. Margaret was wild and free, more comfortable on a horse than in a dress, following Quinn around the farm and demanding to help with everything. She learned to ride at 5, earlier than any of the boys, and had a natural affinity for the horses that made Quinn's heart swell with pride. The twins were inseparable, always together, always plotting some adventure or mischief. They kept everyone on their toes, but they were also sweet-natured and generous, quick to share and help their siblings. In 1890, Clara gave birth to their 5th child, another daughter they named Elizabeth Ann. She was a calm baby, content to watch the chaos around her with solemn eyes, and she brought a sense of completeness to the family. 5 children, a prosperous farm, a house full of love and laughter. Quinn and Clara both felt their family was now complete. The years continued their march. The children grew and changed, started school in town, made friends, developed their own personalities and interests. Quinn taught them all to ride, to track, to read the weather and the land. Clara taught them to read and write, to cook and sew, to think for themselves and treat others with kindness. They were good children, not perfect but trying, and Quinn was proud of each of them. He told them stories about his parents, about his years drifting, about the day he met their mother and tracked down the bandits who stole her ring. That story became a family legend, embellished with each telling, until the twins started acting it out with toy horses and wooden guns. The ring itself, Clara's original wedding ring that Quinn had incorporated into her new one, became a symbol of their family's foundation. The children knew the story behind it, knew about their mother's first husband and their father's lost friend, knew that love and loyalty and courage had brought their parents together. In 1895, when Thomas was 12 and Elizabeth was 5, Quinn and Clara celebrated their 13th anniversary. It was hard to believe 13 years had passed since that December day when they married in the small church. Quinn was 38 now, his dark hair touched with gray at the temples, his face lined from years of sun and work. Clara was 35, still beautiful, her dark eyes still sparkling with the same intelligence and warmth that had first attracted him. They had dinner alone that evening, the children eating in the kitchen with Sarah and Elizabeth, while Quinn and Clara sat in the dining room at the table he had built with his own hands. Clara wore the green dress she knew Quinn loved, and the ring on her finger caught the lamplight, gleaming. 13 years, Clara said, raising her glass of wine in a toast. Who would have thought that terrible day in August would lead to all this? Quinn clinked his glass against hers. I would not change a single thing, not even the hard parts. It all led us here, to this life, to these children. Do you ever miss it? Clara asked. The drifting, the freedom of not being tied down? Quinn considered the question seriously because Clara deserved honesty. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, not having so many people depending on me. But I do not miss the loneliness, the feeling of not mattering to anyone. This life, with you and the children, it is everything I did not know I needed. You gave me a home, Clara. You gave me a purpose beyond just surviving. Clara's eyes were bright with emotion, and you gave me a reason to live again, to hope again. You showed me that it was possible to honor the past while building a future. I loved Thomas, and I will always be grateful for the years we had. But you, Quinn, you are the love of my life. You are my partner, my best friend, the father of my children. I am so grateful those bandits brought you to me. They held hands across the table, these two people who had found each other in the midst of loss and built something beautiful from the broken pieces. The house around them was full of the sounds of their children, the evidence of their love made manifest in 5 young lives. Later, after the children were in bed, Quinn and Clara stood on the porch under the stars, wrapped in each other's arms. The prairie stretched out around them, vast and beautiful, the same land where bandits had once stolen a ring and a cowboy had tracked them down. Tell me what you're thinking, Clara said softly, her head on Quinn's chest. I'm thinking about that day I saw you in the road, so heartbroken and alone. I'm thinking about how I almost did not stop, almost just rode past and let someone else deal with it. And then I am thinking about how different my life would be if I had made that choice. I am glad you stopped, Clara whispered. I am glad you were brave enough to track down those bandits, to bring back my ring, to open your heart to me when I know you were afraid of being hurt again. You were worth the risk, Quinn said, kissing the top of her head. You and the children, this life, all of it. You were worth every risk, every fear, every moment of uncertainty. They stood together in the quiet night. 2 people who had been broken and had healed, who had been lost and had been found, who had taken a tragedy and transformed it into a love story that would last a lifetime. The children grew up strong and healthy, each finding their own path in the world. Thomas went to college in Kansas City, studying law, and came back to Salina to open a practice, marrying a banker's daughter and giving Quinn and Clara their first grandchildren. Margaret married a neighboring rancher's son, a young man who loved horses as much as she did, and they built a life on land adjacent to the family farm. The twins stayed together even as adults, running the horse breeding operation and expanding it beyond what even Quinn had dreamed. Elizabeth, the youngest, became a teacher like her maternal grandfather, educating children in the Salina schoolhouse. Quinn and Clara aged gracefully, their hair going silver, their faces etching with the lines of a life well lived. They passed the day-to-day running of the farm to their children and the hired hands, though Quinn still worked with the horses because he could not imagine a life without them. Clara tended her garden and her grandchildren, passing on family stories and recipes, making sure the next generation knew where they came from. On their 30th anniversary in 1912, the entire family gathered at the house for a celebration. All 5 children were there with their spouses and children, a crowd of nearly 20 people filling the home with noise and love. There was food and music and laughter, and Quinn stood at the head of the table looking at the faces of his family, overwhelmed by the blessing of it all. I want to tell you all a story, he said when the meal was finished and everyone was lingering over coffee and cake. Some of you have heard it before, but I want to tell it again because it is important that you understand how all of this began. The room quieted, the grandchildren leaning forward with interest. Thomas and Margaret and the twins and Elizabeth all smiled, having heard this story countless times but never tiring of it. Quinn reached for Clara's hand, and she gave it to him willingly, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture as natural as breathing. 30 years ago, your mother's wedding ring was stolen by bandits. She was alone and heartbroken, and I was a drifter with no ties and no future. But I saw her standing in that road, and something in me knew I had to help her, so I tracked down those bandits and I got that ring back. He paused, looking at the ring on Clara's finger, the one he had made incorporating a piece of her original wedding band. But what I did not know then was that I was not just recovering a piece of jewelry. I was finding my home. I was finding my purpose. I was finding the love of my life and the family I would build with her. Clara was crying softly, happy tears that their children and grandchildren pretended not to notice. Your father saved more than my ring that day, she said, her voice steady despite the tears. He saved me. He showed me that it was possible to love again, to build again, to believe in happiness even after loss. Everything we have, everything you all are, started with that act of courage and kindness. The family raised their glasses in a toast to Quinn and Clara, to 30 years of marriage, to the love that had built this family from the ashes of tragedy. Quinn kissed his wife in front of their children and grandchildren, not caring who saw, celebrating the woman who had made his life worth living. Years continued to pass, measured now in grandchildren's birthdays and harvest seasons, in quiet mornings on the porch and peaceful evenings by the fire. Quinn's hair went white, and his back developed a permanent ache from decades of ranch work, but his eyes were still the same green that had first caught Clara's attention, and they still looked at her with the same love and devotion. Clara developed arthritis in her hands, making sewing and gardening difficult, but she refused to stop completely. She taught her granddaughters to quilt, passing on patterns and techniques her own mother had taught her. She told them stories about their grandfather tracking down bandits, about falling in love for the second time, about the importance of courage and kindness and never giving up hope. In the spring of 1920, Quinn fell ill with pneumonia. He was 63 years old, and despite the doctor's best efforts and Clara's devoted nursing, his body could not fight off the infection. He died on a warm May morning with Clara holding his hand, their children gathered around the bed, his last words a whispered, "I love you," to the woman who had been his partner for 38 years. Clara was devastated but not broken. She had survived loss before, and she would survive it again, though the pain was immense. At the funeral, she stood straight and strong, accepting condolences with grace, her hand unconsciously going to the ring on her finger, the ring that connected her to both of the men she had loved. She lived another 12 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1932 at the age of 72. Her children found her in the morning, lying in the bed she had shared with Quinn, a small smile on her face, as if she had died dreaming of something pleasant. On her nightstand was a photograph of Quinn, young and handsome in his cowboy clothes, and in her hand was a small pouch containing her original wedding ring from Thomas and a lock of Quinn's hair. They buried her next to Quinn in the Salina Cemetery, under a headstone that read, "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother." At the funeral, Thomas stood before the gathered family and friends and told the story one more time, about the bandits and the ring, about the cowboy who tracked them down, about the love that grew from tragedy. "My mother taught us that love is not about forgetting the past," Thomas said, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd. "It is about honoring what came before while embracing what comes next." She loved two men in her life, and both of those loves shaped who she was and who we became. She and my father built something beautiful from the broken pieces, and that legacy lives on in all of us. The family line continued to grow and thrive, spreading across Kansas and beyond. The original farmhouse and ranch became a family heritage site, maintained by the descendants who remembered the story of Clara and Quinn. The ring, Clara's wedding ring that Quinn had redesigned, was passed down through the generations, given to each eldest daughter on her wedding day, along with the story of how a theft led to a love story, how a cowboy's courage and a widow's resilience built a family that would last for generations. And in the quiet places, in the spaces between heartbeats, the love of Quinn Sutherland and Clara Pembrook lived on, a testament to the power of choosing hope over despair, of choosing to love again even when it seemed impossible, of finding home in the least expected places and building a life worth living from the ashes of what was lost. Their story became a legend in Salina, told and retold, embellished and celebrated. The house still stood nearly a century later, renovated and preserved, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that stolen rings and lost souls can find their way home, and that love, real and true and lasting, is worth every risk, every fear, every moment of uncertainty. It was a story of the Wild West, of bandits and cowboys and the harsh beauty of the Kansas plains, but more than that, it was a story of two people who chose each other, who built something lasting from the rubble of loss, and who proved that love, in all its forms, is the most powerful force in the world.